We're working on a 2005 Hyundai Santa Fe. We're going to be replacing the stereo head unit. In a previous video I'll post up here, we replaced the front speakers. We had to bypass the amplifier. Be sure to watch that if you want new speakers. But in this video, we'll be replacing the head unit. In order to get access to our radio, we pull our little thing out here, and that reveals two screws we want to pull out. They're just Phillips. And our climate control unit comes out. A few plugs in the back, we just disconnect them. And we can set this aside. Next, to remove this trim here, this whole unit comes off as one, leaving the radio behind. There's two screws under here. Again, just Phillips. And pull out. You may be able to use a tool like this. There's a couple connectors behind here as well. And we can set this aside. Now our radio's right there, 4 screws, hold it in. And we'll want to disconnect the back of the radio. And that's it. That's how you remove your factory stereo. At this point, if you forgot to pull out your CD or your cassette tape, you can just plug it back in, turn the ignition on, and pull it out, and then disconnect it again. For a complete job, the things we'll be using is an antenna adapter, a wiring harness adapter, and this allows the stereo to be plugged into the factory wiring harness. I love these. Faceplate. If you're keeping your factory amplifier, then you'll need this conversion that'll convert the signal coming out of the new deck into a line signal that your amplifier can handle. If you do not use one of these and you keep your factory amplifier, it'll sound like garbage. It'll be really muffled or overly amplified. So we definitely want a conversion if you're keeping your old amplifier. Now, if you're replacing the front speakers and the rear speakers and you are bypassing the amplifier altogether, then one of these is not necessary. Now, all these things that I just pointed out super fast, I'll have in the description below. All right, let's start putting this thing in. So this is the adapter harness for plugging into the factory. So it'll go on like that when we're all done, right into the factory connector. This harness is for the stereo, so this plugs in to the deck. You may look at all these wires and go, oh man, that's confusing and hard, but really, they're labeled. This black here says chassis ground on this connector. This black says ground on this connector. So they're both color-coded and labeled for easy installation. So this is where our paths can split. What's left are just the 8 speaker wires, positive and negative for each speaker, makes 8 wires altogether. If you're keeping the factory amplifier, what you want to do is use this Scosche converter. It says line in or input, line out, output. You can, from here, put it into your Scosche, and then your Scosche just fits up here. One thing with that though is anytime you want to make adjustments, you have to have the radio out of its slot so you can gain access to it. Or you can go ahead and hook these up like normal, so the harness is just one harness, and put this skosh under the seat by the factory amplifier. That's up to you. All right, once everything's on, we'll give these a light tug. I like using heat shrink, so I'll go ahead and just light these up and have them shrunk on there, and our harness is good to go. I like tugging on them first because out of all mine, one didn't pass the test. So I just zip tied these together. You can tape them if you want. On the radio harness, I have some wires that weren't used. So far, the front camera power, the rear camera power, the remote output, the reverse input, and the parking brake input. Those are not used at this moment, but everything else has been used. So we can plug this into the factory side. We can hook up the antenna adapter to the factory side. So it's ready to go. So now get your radio of choice and we'll get it prepped for installation. Now your new stereo comes with a mounting bracket, but we'll throw these away. What we want is our faceplate. What a faceplate does is gives you the trim around the face and the mounting to appear factory. It comes with a set of instructions that I'll follow, and afterwards I'll show you the final product. All right, so that's the product. This is the trim piece here. That's the mounting that's supposed to match factory mounting. And then you use the screws and you just try to find the holes that line up. Use the screws that came with the aftermarket mounting kit, only we're not using the brackets, just the screws that came with it. So now we can do a dry fit and just make sure that we got it all straight before putting everything back together. Now we'll put this on. Just gonna put 2 screws in it and then make sure our trim piece is gonna fit. Alright, so I did the faceplate just a little different than the instructions. Doing the dry fit, it just wasn't looking right, it wasn't fitting right. So what I did was put the fat shims on the bottom, no shims on top. In the instructions, it tells you to put the fat shims on both top and bottom. I found it best to fat shim the bottom, no shim the top, and I had to notch out the top just a little. Let me show you why. Because on the back side of the panel, on the underside, there's these little screws right here. They were hitting on the faceplate, the top of the faceplate, and pushing down on the top of the faceplate. So I just notched out to make room for those. And that's what I had to do. Minor modifications, but we are good to go. So now we can go ahead and plug in our main plug. Plug in our antenna. Set everything in there. Now let's see if it'll turn on before we bolt it in. So far, so good. See if we can. So that's the left front. Getting something. Right front. Good. Right rear. and left rear. So we're getting something out of every speaker. Great. So now we can go ahead and put everything back together. All right, this part of the installation is complete. All right, there you go. That's how you can install an aftermarket stereo in a Hyundai Santa Fe. One thing I did not show is hooking up the skosh. The reason why is after playing with it, adjusting the equalizer and things like that, I found that I did not need it for this setup. Now the front speakers, like mentioned before, are aftermarket. The amplifier is bypassed. The rear speakers are factory, and they utilize the factory amp. They're not distorted, they're not too loud, they sound really good. So I decided to opt not to use the skosh converter. Now if you do decide to use it, it does come with instructions. Most likely what you'll need is illustration D, which utilizes the factory amplifier. So you'll see that in the description. Follow the wiring, but it comes up with a couple of different scenarios just depending on what you want to do with your system. If you want to add subs or other things in that pamphlet, it kind of explains a little bit about that. All right, well, this is it for this video. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. See you on the next one.